Welcome to the Sterning HR podcast, your ultimate destination for all things HR and professional career development. I'm your host, Bianca Clifton, and I'm thrilled to have you with us. At Sterning HR, we take immense pride in being a specialist HR recruitment and coaching organisation. Our mission is to provide valuable insights and engaging discussions with some of the most impressive HR leaders in the industry. So whether you're a HR professional seeking to enhance your knowledge or someone looking to unlock the full potential of their career, you've come to the right place. In each episode, we dive into the world of human resources. We explore the latest trends, innovative strategies, and game-changing practices that are shaping the workplace of today and tomorrow. Our focus on empowering women is close to our hearts. We believe that every woman deserves to get what she wants and be valued for her true worth. Together, we strive to create an environment where women can thrive, flourish, and confidently pursue their ambitions without having to sacrifice their family life. Thank you for tuning into the Sterning HR podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and stay connected with us for exciting episodes to come. In this episode of the podcast, we're joined by Melodi James, who is a workplace risk and employee relations specialist at WTW. Melodi holds a Bachelor of Business and a Master of Labour Law and Relations. Melodi is an accredited mediator and experienced leader in human resources and employee and industrial relations. She's worked across a wide range of industries, including engineering, medical technology, professional services, online services and healthcare for organisations such as Johnson & Johnson and LinkedIn. Melodi has experience supporting Australian and multinational companies ranging from 100 to over 100,000 employees and has held people leader roles with responsibility for leading and growing large teams of skilled HR and employee relations practitioners. Melodi's expertise is in providing support for businesses and leaders to resolve employment issues and disputes, including complex cases involving workplace conflict, performance management, grievance, disciplinary, and other employee and labour relations matters. Melodi, it's great to have you here on the podcast today.
Thanks, Bianca. Great to be here.
So today is part one of a two-part series on managing absenteeism and wellbeing, where we will be unpacking how absenteeism and wellbeing impact the workplace, what the common challenges are for HR leaders in managing this, how businesses can define and link absenteeism to employee relations and quantify what the actual cost to the business is, from wellbeing to team dynamics to organisational performance. So in part two, we'll be discussing how to bring together the tools and people to build a comprehensive wellbeing program that addresses and puts in place strategies and practices to effectively manage absenteeism and wellbeing in any organisation. So let's jump in. Melodi, can you start by giving us an overview of the state of employee relations in terms of absenteeism and wellbeing and what is impacting this in the workplace?
Thanks, Bianca. And this is a big question. I think there's lots of things or lots of factors that are impacting wellbeing and absenteeism in workplaces. But I wanted to touch in particular on three key things that my team and I have been discussing with our clients and seeing. The first, I think, has to be mentioned, which is the current economic uncertainty and stresses that people are facing within workplaces. And research is telling us that more and more people are struggling to make ends meet. And no doubt this has an impact on the way in which people show up at work. Research reports and literature informing the Fair Work Commission's annual wage review found that the cost of living has impacted low and middle income households, access to things like general health care. So that means, going to see a GP or being able to access private health insurance. More broadly, some of the research has also demonstrated that the impact of the current economic environment is touching on other matters like access to childcare, access to basic healthy food, clothing, household goods, personal care, transport. The research is also showing that disproportionately this is impacting female caregivers, and those workers are typically modern award covered or likely to be on minimum wage and performing work that is modern award covered, and those jobs are more likely to be casual in nature. The second factor to touch on, which I think is really important in terms of a trend that's happening around absenteeism and wellbeing, is an ongoing move by employers and organisations in terms of looking at more innovative strategic initiatives, and particularly with respect to offering flexibility in workplaces. There's the ongoing debate about return to the office. But really, I think a lot of that is being driven by an attempt to address growing mental health and wellbeing concerns at work. Companies that have participated in trials of the 4-day work week are seeing really great results.
Yeah, they've seen such good success, haven't they?
100%. Some of the data coming out of those trials has demonstrated that a 4-day work week has had an impact on things like reductions in sick leave, improved employee retention, and improved attraction of talent, which in a lot
is saving so much money for organisations, just in terms of every key thing that you hit on there. So not having that turnover that they're having a wider range of employees that they can bring into the organisation, with having that flexibility piece, and then having the reduction in terms of those sick days as well. We talk about, I guess, and I know we talk about this later, in terms of HR not being seen as, I guess, a contributor in terms of making money, but in terms of what they can save, in terms of having these steps put in place that can make such a difference to the business's bottom line, and to that employee experience as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's part of what you need to speak to as being an HR leader is, what's the impact, what's the return on investment with respect to initiatives. So I think companies that have participated in trials of the 4-day work week, being able to come out the other end of that and demonstrate to their CFO or to those people within the business that are key for decision making, what the actual bottom line impact of that trial or additional flexibility has been is really helpful.
And you can do that with the data now, do you know? Like in terms of being able to record that, they can. But I guess it's something that you need to put in place now, so then you've got that time that lapses, so you can review, all right, 12 months ago, this is what it looked like, to actually have access to that data to be able to compare how the business is in a better position from implementing those types of initiatives from a financial perspective.
Absolutely. And I think we're gonna touch on that a little bit later on, because again, being able to first identify what your actual issue is, what the root causes are, using data to tell that story, and then ensure that the initiative that you're implementing is addressing that appropriately is critical. The other trend that we're seeing at the moment, which I'm sure a lot of the listeners are familiar with, is the growing wellbeing industry and wellbeing at work industry. And along with that, companies being given budgets to implement wellbeing initiatives. But it's really interesting, I think we've got on the other side of that, an increase in the number of workers' compensation claims for psychological ill health. And the Victorian Workers' Comp Scheme, just to touch on it, has proposed a really significant shift with respect to psychological injury claims, and that's partly driven by the huge growth in people claiming workers' compensation for psychological injury or ill health, such that the scheme in Victoria has now become unsustainable, and WorkCover Victoria can't fund the number of claims that are and the growth that they've seen in this space.
And that's interesting. Do you think, has that been since? Do they have the data to know, has that significantly shifted since COVID, or it's just been continually rising?
Specifically with respect to COVID and what the impact has been, I think no doubt that has fueled the number of claims that workers' comp insurers and the schemes are seeing. And I think that's for a range of reasons. You know, a lot of people experience significant shifts in the way that they were expected to work during COVID, but also the amount of work that was expected from them. The data is telling us that people are burnt out. They're overworked.
Yeah, and especially as well, like not even work. I mean, obviously that element, but then their personal element to it as well. A lot of people's lives drastically changed during that time, where relationships change. I think with a lot of individuals or families, or where kind of people have their own separate lives and they're managing, but that doesn't mean things are working smoothly. And then you put that in an environment where people are stuck in the same place together 24/7, and they don't have that kind of escapism, then that, in terms of the mental health load, obviously impacts, and then they take that to work or take it home where they're working. I think a lot of people who kind of were getting by, it's just exacerbated that, and obviously it flows on from both personal, family, home life into the workplace as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people didn't have their usual support systems in place. So access to usual care, being able to see your friends, your family, being able to connect with your colleagues and, you know, vent to the person that understands what you're dealing with.
Friends.
Or you know, I think that definitely impacted people, but also I think there's been a sense of COVID's over now, let's just get back to normal, and perhaps not quite the level of recognition that people actually need a bit of recovery time from what's happened.
Yeah. What are some of the common challenges faced by HR leaders, Melody, in managing absenteeism and promoting wellbeing in the workplace? So some of the barriers that they have to push through.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I want to caveat my responses by pointing out the fact that, you know, we're talking about challenges that HR leadership might face in promoting absenteeism, dealing with absenteeism, or promoting wellbeing within the workplace. But oftentimes the people that are actually frontline managing these sort of individual employee issues are the managers, the line managers themselves. So I think when we're thinking about initiatives and how we go about promoting wellbeing in the workplace, we have to do that by approaching it with the lens of what's going to equip our line managers with the right capability and confidence as well.
And confidence, I think, is key, isn't it? In terms 100%. Of that education piece. Because I know what we will see is a lot of managers, they have the want to be able to do it, but they're not sure around the way to actually go about it. And I guess because there are ramifications around that, it can make managers or individuals seem afraid to take that step. So in terms of equipping them with through, I guess, your HR team, that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit more about manager capability, but I guess first up, probably the most common challenge that I see in my dealings with HR leaders in my roles previously within HR teams is the lack of resourcing. So whether that's time, being able to find the time to stop putting out fires, and look at things a bit more proactively, whether that's cost or, you know, hands on deck to actually do the work that we need to get done, and juggling so many different priorities. I think when you're an HR leader, the sorts of things that you might be dealing with, the competing priorities that you might need to manage, can make that resourcing and being able to push forward an initiative with respect to wellbeing quite challenging. And
because
I think
you need to have that buy-in.
That's right. And a lot of times there can be a level of control that we have as an HR leader. And sometimes there are just things that are outside of our control, like the environment that we might be operating within. You know, for example, if you're under pressure or the business is under pressure to reduce costs or look at headcount, that might not be the right environment for an HR leader to then feel empowered, to feel motivated to talk about well-being or psychosocial risk. You know, the focus, it might not be there with the rest of the leadership team. That might not be seen as the top priority. The other thing might be, I guess, a misconception, I think, in some instances, that you need a big budget to actually be able to implement a really nice, shiny wellbeing initiative.
But I think what we've found from being able to do implementing the shiny wellbeing initiatives, that's all they really are, isn't it? It's shiny.
Sometimes, yeah. Like,
and it's actually not talking to what the employees are actually looking for. But I think that's a challenge as well, because employees are individual. So it's about, when you're thinking about these initiatives with what you can put together that are low cost as well, how do you individualize it enough, but then make it broad enough where it speaks to everyone in the organisation as well?
Yeah. And that's, again, where we're looking at your data, really digging down into the root causes is critical, because you're not going to be able to implement something that's impactful and that addresses what your specific workforce needs without understanding those root causes. And I think also maybe taking a step back as well, sometimes people ask the question, like, where's HR for HR? And I think that's a really interesting point, in the sense that if the expectation amongst the business is wellbeing's an HR thing, you know, okay, we'll give you a bit of budget to go ahead and, you know, do some nice activities or implement something, you know, that sounds great. But in the background, you've got these HR teams that are absolutely pushed to the limit in terms of what they can actually do and achieve. It's really difficult to find the motivation, and also I think it can feel disingenuous, right? If you're talking about self-care and well-being and trying to manage absenteeism, and in the background you've got your own team that's absolutely pushed to the brink, that can be really difficult. I mean, look, I think it has to be said that for most businesses, an HR team, it's not a revenue generating function. So, you know, that has to be recognised, and the commerciality around that needs to be recognised. So,
but it is a revenue saving function. So I actually think it is. When you flip that, it actually, I find it is saving the business money. So somehow it is generating from, if it's done well. But I think it's very interesting what you mentioned around HR not having that support there as well. And I think where I saw that come out really crystal clear was during COVID. Because I think COVID was a really good opportunity for HR teams to recognise, or organisations to recognise, that HR needs support as well, because you can kind of get by when you haven't had, I guess, something as large as that happen. But it takes, I guess, something like COVID to realise, all right, well, actually, no, we need support as well. So I think a lot of organisations that we work with did some really good things in terms of recognising that their teams needed more support, and how do they put that in place for themselves as well.
Yeah. And I mean, COVID was, I think, just the ultimate example of firefighting from an HR perspective. Having been in HR, ER for nearly the last 10 years, I've never dealt with a situation like COVID before. And I think it's hard, I can't compare to, for example, the frontline healthcare workers that I was supporting during that time in the business that I was in. They were doing the most amazing work, and were absolutely putting themselves, you know, and their health at risk to make sure that they were delivering these essential services. in the background, you want, as an HR leader, to be able to provide the best available support, but it's really difficult to do that, right? If in the background you're fighting fires and you're dealing with employee conflicts or grievances or misconduct issues.
And that you haven't seen before as well. Like in an environment that that you haven't been in before, that you're trying to navigate at the same time that's continually changing.
That's right, like public health orders and, people, I think, just being pushed to their absolute limit certainly was an interesting time.
I think we kind of went through a stage of just surviving, didn't we?
Definitely. But I mean, look, in the midst of all of that, it was so front of mind what our teams were experiencing. I was in healthcare at the time, and being able to sort of share stories with the rest of the business about what our workers were doing and how they were supporting such important healthcare was, I think, really, a positive, visible step that the business took to recognise people, and that's a huge part of a wellbeing strategy as well, is that,
and it's therapeutic as well. Yeah, it's therapeutic 100%. When you share that, because then you realise that everyone is going through different things, but it also unites you as well. So for an organisation to do that well I think there's a lot of benefits, knock-on benefits for doing that as well.
With the point that you raised earlier about managers and sort of not knowing what they can and can't do, that manager confidence piece, I think that's probably, I would say, one of the top challenges that I've faced and that I've seen other HR teams, other HR leaders that I've worked with.
And it's the top challenge that we hear across all the organisations that we work with.
Yeah. And look, I think there's a range of reasons why manager capability has such an impact on absenteeism and well-being within workplaces. But I think a few of the factors or challenges that I've seen around this are, one, managers genuinely care, they genuinely want to support, like you've mentioned, but they've either had a bad experience in the past, so they've dealt with a claim, or they've dealt with a case that's just gone absolutely terribly and had a really poor outcome, so they're really cautious about what they do moving forward or with other issues, or they're aware that there are privacy and confidentiality concerns, so they're sort of asking themselves, what can I do? What can I ask? What can I say? I don't want to get the business in legal trouble. I don't want the employee to feel uncomfortable. And there's the whole concept, which a lot of the listeners will be familiar with, of reasonable management action to consider. And that kind of pokes its head up in the context of workers' compensation claims and complying with our legal obligations around, procedural fairness and dealing with performance or conduct issues in a manner that doesn't, breach our obligations. So to give you, I guess, an example of a very sort of common case that I would typically deal with or that I've seen before is a manager seeing that an employee within their team is struggling, so performance might have dropped. They might be seeing other behavioural type signs of this person struggling. They might be aware that the person is dealing with an issue outside of work. And sometimes I think what managers can do, I've seen this so many times, is instead of having a conversation and approaching the matter in a direct, sort of transparent way to determine, what support might be needed, what steps we need to take to get things back on track, they put the conversation off. They don't get advice and support, perhaps from the resources within their business. They hope that things will change. And I think it's only natural as humans. We a lot of us don't like confrontation.
Well, I think it's that resistance, isn't it? Because when it comes up, it is having that confrontation. But I think what you're going to say as well, and where you'd want to get to as an organisation, is where those conversations are comfortable conversations. So where that manager is comfortable enough to go and have that chat to that person in their team without feeling like there's going to be ramifications, and where they're going to start feeling, I guess, uncomfortable about, okay, this is HR.
Yeah.
HR need to be handling this now. And HR will need to handle it when it does get escalated. But even just educating managers to have those, to feel comfortable in terms of having those conversations. And I guess they're more kind of identifying if there is an actual issue there, but having it, I guess, in more of a conversational style. So how have you done that in the past? How do you work with those managers to make them feel comfortable to explore that?
I talk a lot with managers about early intervention strategies that they can use. So a lot of businesses have implemented things like mental health first aid training. They might know, or they might have a certain level of capability within their business around identifying signs of concerns or issues that might be occurring, or that an employee might be facing. My top tip is, don't avoid the conversation. And I link that to ensuring that managers understand that they have a duty of care. The business has a primary duty of care to take action when you are seeing that something is happening that might cause risk to the business or to the employee and the health and safety of the employee. And we can't fulfill our duty of care without having the conversation. The second tip, or the second step,
and I love that, the duty of care, because it's putting that responsibility, because if you don't have that responsibility, like you're there, it's just an uncomfortable feeling. The employee, my team member, might not want me to talk to them about this. I don't feel comfortable talking about it. I don't want to escalate it to HR yet, because I don't think it's as big a deal, but they have no visibility around actually what's going on. But if you then kind of reframe that with, actually, I've got a duty of care of a manager to have this conversation with this employee for their sake, then you're putting that responsibility on them. And then I think they'd be more inclined to go and have that initial chat and then talk to HR or talk to them beforehand to say, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah. I mean, again, from an early intervention perspective, I always used to say to managers that I was supporting that I'd rather that they call me early and we have a conversation about what might be going on. Sometimes those initial conversations, they might not even tell me who the employee is. They might just, they really, and sometimes I really love that, because I can see the genuine care. They want to be able to maintain that person's privacy and confidentiality, but they seek advice in the same way that you would get advice when you might be doing your tax return, or doing perhaps starting a new business venture. You're going to speak to someone that has the expertise in that area. So one, don't feel afraid to get advice, and it might not even be getting advice, but just bouncing your idea or your strategy and approaching the situation off someone else. So if it's not HR, it might be with another senior leader within the business, another manager that maybe has a lot of experience, and you can sort of give them an outline of the situation. You don't have to tell the person what the employee's name is, and let them know, look, this is how I'm going to approach an initial conversation. Have you ever dealt with this before? Do you have any tips for me? But so my first step is, like, look at what early steps can you take to equip yourself for the conversation if you're a manager. And that's where HR can be really impactful in terms of making it clear to managers, one, that they have that duty of care, and what support and resources are available for managers, if they're facing a situation. The second step is, I always talk to managers and leaders about doing the fact find. So making sure that you've got the facts, and the only way that you can do that, making sure you've got the facts before you decide what action you're taking. And the only way you can do that is by having a conversation. So before you go into that conversation, you've got kind of what you might have seen, what you might have heard, what you may have observed through interactions with the employee, but you might not yet have their perspective
Their
or
side.
their views.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is an approach I would suggest that you take kind of in all or most circumstances when you're dealing with an issue. But and that first conversation might just go something like, I've noticed these things. Is there something that you want to chat about, or is there something that I might be able to do to help you with this? Or can you tell me a bit more about, what's been going on? If you've observed a specific issue, you might bring that up and say, I observed the way that you spoke with your colleague in this meeting, and it seems like, you're not having a great day. Can we have a chat about that? And is there anything that I can do? Like, talk to me about what's going on. So just opening up the conversation. And I think a lot of us are really familiar with that approach through the Are You Okay initiatives, in just having that conversation around, this is what I've noticed. Are you okay? And what might I be able to do to help you?
Yeah.
Sometimes the conversation that you need to have might need to have a more explicit ending or outcome with respect to your expectations or what you need from that person. So for example, with recurring absenteeism and someone not calling their manager or their employer to let them know that they're not going to be coming to work, that's an issue. One, it's an issue from a duty of care perspective. When someone doesn't show up for work and they don't tell you that they're not coming in, the first thing you need to be doing as an employer is making sure that that person's okay and making inquiries as to their welfare.
Yeah.
So if that's
and why they're not at work and why they're not communicating.
Exactly.
But I would think with the initial conversations that we're talking about, they're initial conversations that you'd be having. And then once, if you need to have those firmer conversations around that, where you do need, like you mentioned, going through a proper process, you've got your HR team there as well, if you don't have that capability. But a lot of managers as well will have that capability. But I think a lot of the stuff that you're talking about as well, it comes back to HR creating that culture within the organisation, where we are talking about it, where we are having these conversations, where for you to be able to go to a colleague and another manager and bounce things off them, it needs to be a culture that's in that's running through that business to have those other, I guess, peers who see the value in managing your employees the right way.
Absolutely. And encouraging those cohorts of leaders to work together and to utilize each other as a bit of a support network, because we learn so much, and HR can't deal with every single issue all the time, every day. So it's,
and you don't want to be either. These managers
not.
want to be,
Look, I think we've touched on the fact that, you need to have potentially a plan for looking at your resourcing, whether you're set up appropriately in terms of your priorities and what you're focusing on. I think manager capability goes without saying. That's probably one of the most critical.
Getting that buy-in.
Yeah. And using the data that you might have within your business, using your HR metrics to actually paint a story around why a particular initiative might be helpful, but also pointing to some of the root causes from a workforce perspective. That's going to be different across different businesses,
around
different industries and organizations.
Around the absentee. And I think so an example of that would be with an organization who just has this, having quite a high absenteeism rate, like you're mentioning. It's about actually looking in, so it will be linked to employee relations matters generally. So looking in and actually breaking those areas down to see what are the common trends that we're finding. So what are the instances that are coming up? Like, is it performance? Is it mental health? Is it workers' compensation? And once you kind of can then break down into those key areas, then it's about kind of taking a deep dive and understanding what's happening within those areas of the business for those individuals to have that knock-on effect that they're having that results in whether it's a certain employee relations matter or whether it's a workers' compensation matter. Is that right?
I mean, I think absolutely the number of cases or like reported issues is an indicator that you would want to look at.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily think that tells the whole story a lot of the time, because we know that in a lot of instances, issues just aren't reported within businesses for certain reasons.
Yeah.
And that might be linked to cultural factors. For example, if employees within a business see what happens when, you know, their colleague raises a complaint and then the next minute that person doesn't work there anymore, you know, what story does that tell the rest of the employees about what happens when someone raises an issue? So I think it, you know, you can use case numbers or complaints numbers as kind of one metric or factor that you would look at, but it doesn't tell you the whole picture. And just because you don't have, you know, I think this is a really relevant point for sexual harassment, given the recent law changes in that space. Those laws tell us that just because you don't have reports of sexual harassment within your workplace doesn't mean
they're not happening.
And that you don't need to be taking preventative action.
Yeah.
So I approach kind of other psychosocial risk factors, other factors that impact absenteeism and well-being in the same manner. Just because you're not seeing the numbers in your cases doesn't mean that those issues aren't there. I mean, some of the metrics that I suggest people look at is your levels of absenteeism, so your utilization of sick leave. And when you're talking to your leadership team, for example, about absenteeism, it really helps to quantify that, like actually put a dollar figure to what that looks like.
Yeah.
I also suggest looking at other types of leave. So you might not only look at sick leave, but look at your annual leave utilization. A lot of people do look at that already because they like to manage that from a liability perspective. It's a big bucket of money. But looking at it from different aspects. So if you've got, you know, particular areas of the workforce that have huge levels of annual leave, why might that be? And instead of just taking action to force people to take leave, looking at it more holistically in terms of the reasons why these people have such significant leave balances and what that might be telling you about, you know, how they're being managed, how they're being supported, what their resourcing
that's quite
looks
interesting.
Like.
So I think that's quite interesting, that point that you made around individuals who would have high levels of annual leave. There's two sides to that. It's not that the individual doesn't want to take leave and that they're accumulating it. They might not feel that they're able to take leave as well. So that's a interesting development.
Yeah. And again, like looking at it in terms of your workforce at a really high level, the metrics might look really good, but when you actually dig down into particular pockets or teams, that might tell you or give you a clearer picture around what the challenges or risks might be within that space. So you know, but firstly, what you have to do is the analysis and digging down into, okay, well, you know, what does our data say? What do our decision makers and our leadership team care about with respect to that information, and how do we quantify it in a way that makes it impactful for them, so that we have the ability to drive initiatives and influence decisions that will ultimately have an impact, a positive impact on the people that are doing the work. And linking that as much as you can to what the company is trying to achieve, you know. So if you're in this sort of high growth space, which is a really nice place to be in, but you know, one of the things that you can look at is, how might you identify risk factors, and that might be psychosocial risk factors that could become derailers for that either key team or for the business in achieving its growth plans and objectives. Looking at
so preventative measures more so than reactive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, look, the reality is, because of the psychosocial risk regulations that businesses are managing at the moment, you need to be taking these steps anyway. That risk assessment process is kind of, well, in most jurisdictions, it's going to become a legal requirement, but it's a really great way to get a picture of, what might be the challenges, what might be the risks, and linking again back to the business objectives. If you've got a really good handle on, the job demands for the particular types of work that your people are doing, the way in which their work has been designed, not only from, I guess, a productivity or talent perspective, but from a psychosocial risk perspective, that's going to give you a much better opportunity to design initiatives and take steps that actually have an impact on people. We've spoken quite a bit about wellbeing. We touched on absenteeism, but I guess I want to talk a little bit more about the flow-on impact of absenteeism within workplaces, and I guess the types of impacts that we can see with respect to team dynamics, with organisational performance. I think a lot of the time, businesses or clients, managers that I've worked with, they may not necessarily recognize that they've got a challenge with respect to absenteeism. And so once we've identified that, we can start to sort of work through where some of the other challenges they might be seeing, how that might be actually linked to the absenteeism problem that a client or an employer might be dealing with. And I think as HR leaders, the audience will know when employees are absent, it has a pretty significant impact. It can indicate underlying issues, whether it's a health issue or something else that might be going on either with the employee personally or within the workplace. And this in turn has a contribution and impact on job satisfaction levels, burnout levels, overall well-being, and reducing and impacting overall well-being. So I think it's really important for HR leaders to recognise the link between absenteeism, identifying that in the first instance, and then how that might be feeding into overall well-being, their overall well-being strategy, or the initiatives and steps that they might be taking to address well-being within their workplace. But then also to help, address or identify root causes. So, I mean, one of the most common issues that I have supported managers with, or heard about from managers, is that the impact of one person that is often not at work is felt by their wider team. And I think managers find it so difficult to manage that because what can you say? You can't tell the rest of the team, if this person's dealing with particular health issues or personal issues that might explain why they're not at work. You can't necessarily tell the team about that.
Share that.
That's right. But you've also got this challenge of managing what can become an increasing health and safety risk for the rest of the people within your business. That's right. Because if one, and particularly when you're working, within a lean business, when
it's
one
really
person,
felt, it's really
100%.
The rest of the team is impacted. Yeah,
that's right. So one person's off and that work doesn't go away.
It could be a 25% increase for everyone in the team when you think about
that's
it,
right.
a smaller team.
That's right. And I think the impacts of that can be really difficult to manage. It can lead to a lot of frustration, a lot of stress within the team.
A lot of burnout, a lot of disengagement.
Absolutely. And just the general kind of team morale, the willingness of others to collaborate within the team as well. And, it can kind of turn into a multitude of issues. But if you've got that level of resentment among people within the team for having to pick up that extra workload, that extra stress, that can lead to...
I think one of the challenges, sorry to cut you off there, is especially if the manager isn't able to share the reasons why, there's that feeling for the rest of the team, well, we aren't being told the reason why we have to do this. So not being able to share with them and not have that communication piece to it really can make people then be like, well, if they're not involving me in this but expecting me to pick up the workload. But you're right, in some, like a lot of situations, you can't share that personal information as well. But I guess what managers can do is have dialogue around that, not talking about the specific circumstances for that event, for that individual.
Yeah, being as open and transparent as you can about the situation without breaching confidentiality, without victimizing, or scapegoating someone. And HR leaders can help managers find the language and the words. I think you're much more likely to get a better outcome. And that's what I've seen, at least in my experience, when managers acknowledge the challenge with the rest of the team. Hey, I know this is a really challenging situation that we're managing at the moment. I know that you've picked up this additional workload, expressing that appreciation and that recognition and acknowledging it, as opposed to just
sweeping it under the carpet.
Pretending it's not happening. So I think, where HR leaders have an opportunity to support managers in that respect is with the language, with the strategies. But also I think you can't let situations like that just go on without being addressed. And I've touched on the psychosocial risk issue, but part of what businesses need to understand, what managers need to understand, is when there is a significant issue like that that's impacting workload distribution, having a negative impact on a wider group of people, that becomes a health and safety risk. And there has to be strategies, there have to be steps taken to actually manage that. And there's only sort of so long that can go on for, but before it becomes really unsustainable for people. And more broadly, that ends up leading into how the organization performs as well. When people are absent, absenteeism can often be kind of catchy in a way. What you might see is that you have a pocket of absenteeism, and because of the flow on impact of that to the wider team, you start to have more and more people actually not coming to work. And I've seen that happen before. And that can impact operationally and commercially much more significantly. It becomes this exponential issue to manage and deal with, that ultimately has an impact on end customers and clients. Delays work, means deadlines are missed. There's more cost. You end up having to hire temps to fill in the gaps. And that can impact things like reputation of a brand, because you don't have enough people to answer the phone and help your customers, for example. So
and the rest of the team as well, who will start looking at external opportunities as well, because 100%. Their workloads increase. So like the ramifications of it are wide, aren't they?
Absolutely. And, and that's, we haven't even sort of thought or talked about the actual cost of just paying for sick leave. And I know that, if your enterprise agreement covered, you might have more generous sick leave provisions. But even, having people out utilizing all of their sick leave and then potentially moving into unpaid leave. Whilst that unpaid leave might not cost you anything, you still don't have anyone there doing the work that you need them there to be doing.
So it does cost. Yeah, it does.
Exactly.
Cost you. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think, that's where, again, going back to what we were talking about with respect to the metrics and looking at your absenteeism data and pulling out those impactful data points around what's going on within your wider business, but then also those teams where there might be hotspots, and making sure you've got at least the basics in terms of absence management policies, and your kind of core support initiatives and support available for people that might be struggling is kind of the minimum that you'd expect. But again, we haven't touched on it, and you could probably talk about it for a while, but just the cost of turnover is a huge one. And from a retention perspective, I mean, if people feel like, what's the point in me showing up today to deal with this onslaught of, upset customers, the rest of my team's frazzled and stressed. We've had multiple people out every week, someone's out on sick leave. Ultimately, people are going to look for somewhere else to work. And the cost of that, losing that talent, losing the time that you've spent in training and upskilling these people.
Losing that IP, going through the recruitment process, putting the time into it, paying agency fees or not, but even having a talent team to do that, and then bringing them on and onboarding them and going through that. And the thing is, if an organisation is having this high level of absenteeism or employee relations matters, generally there's something happening there within the culture of the organisation, like we've kind of hit on. So you're probably not going to retain those new employees that you're bringing in, because they're going to walk into that organisation and they're going to be like, well, what happened to the last person who was in this role? And then find that potentially the team that they've joined, they've just had continual turnover. There's a reason for that.
Yeah, 100%.
And they're not going to want to stay in an organisation or an environment like that.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much this has been a great chat. Just a reminder that we will be covering off how to bring together the tools and people to build a comprehensive wellbeing program in part 2 of this podcast. So some of the things that we will be discussing will be how HR leaders can foster a culture of wellbeing within their organisation, addressing root causes, so how you can identify the underlying causes of absenteeism, measuring impact and continuous improvement, and what immediate steps can HR leaders take or the ELT, C-suite, take to address absenteeism and promote wellbeing within their organisation. So I can't wait to dig in with that with you, but I appreciate your time. It's been
Thanks
fantastic.
so much, Bianca.